Hello everybody, I hope you all had a happy, nice Christmas and New Year's and everybody's made it into 2011 and you're all safe and happy and secure. And here we are, 2011. Things do feel different, I think, and a lot of people have said it to me as well. There's something about this, as soon as it came into 2011 there was almost like an energy shift or something. I don't know, maybe it's just a number, maybe just 2010 was sucky for a lot of people with the economy and everything. But either way, here we are. We better make the most of it, enjoy ourselves. I want to talk about something different today. I've been reading a lot about the role of diet in history and how diet has been used to control populations and also enhance them when they were needed at certain times. Examples of this is that you could go back to the time of the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians. There was a common stereotype, mainly whipped about by the British Israelite movement of the Victorian era, that these slaves were whipped. They were whipped and beaten really hard, and they built these pyramids as slaves. And the archaeological data and findings have shown the complete opposite. They were very, very well fed, well treated. They had, relatively excellent working conditions. Back then, at the time of the First Kingdom, they actually had better working conditions than what industrial workers in Western Europe had during the time of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. So they were well fed. And that was for two reasons. One, it was to keep them physically strong. There was a lot of protein in their diet. They would eat a lot of like beef and things like that, fish from the Nile. This was to build muscles, and but also to keep them intellectually cognitive and aware. Because they were needed. You look at these construction projects, they're pretty intense. They're technically very demanding. So you needed an intelligent workforce who could work hard, but also having a sense of adaptability. They were needed to do certain things, think a certain way. You want the high levels of protein in their diet, and the high levels of animal fat in particular would help build their brains. Your brain is mostly fat and water, so they were kept in a state of good mental and physical health through their diet, which would have been very protein based, particularly beef. Now we move on to the time of the medieval period, around the time of the Land Enclosure Act in England. The exact opposite was happening, particularly in England, but all over Europe. But particularly in England, it was pretty insidious at this time, where the population would be kept on a diet that was mainly carbohydrate and grains that had low protein. There was a reason for this. The serf population, who were basically slaves. That's exactly what they were, who were under the jurisdiction, oppression really, of the Anglo-Norman warlords, feudal system, who would restrict their diet to things like barley, oats, and whatever kind of vegetables they could forage around from the wild. And this gave them just enough strength to work in the fields, to be able to till crops and look after animals, but not enough strength and particularly mental protein where they could actually form collectives and go after these bastards who are making their lives this way. This actually continued right into the First World War. That's one of the reasons the British Army suffered so badly in the first years of the First World War. Even at that period, 1914, the working class in England, Scotland and Ireland still didn't have really any decent access to protein. They were still living on things like porridge and things like that. So they were actually shorter, and when they started feeding them, they actually got taller during the war. That's why even in the worst parts of World War One, the food was actually towards 1916, 17, 18. The food was very good in the trenches. Things like British soldiers would have been exposed to things like chicken curry. It's remarkable, with lots of meat in it. So that's what. So the controlling classes would feed you when they needed you, like in a war or a major construction project. In Ireland in the 1840s, we had a terrible catastrophe that was called the Great Famine. Americans call it the potato famine, but that's really not a good not a good term to use, because a lot of Irish people find that very offensive. They didn't eat potatoes because that's all they wanted. They only ate potatoes because that was all they could get. Potatoes are, apart from the fact they don't really have any essential oils in them, they're very good for keeping you alive. And potatoes grew very, very well in the damp climate, particularly in the west of Ireland, where most of the millions died or had to leave when the potato blight happened. And when I lived in America, a lot of Americans, and not just in America, but it happened in England and Australia too, they'd ask me questions like, well, how come they only ever have potatoes? You see, we're imposing our 20th century and 21st century mindset on these people. They didn't have access to supermarkets. You know, you're talking about, there was other social factors involved, like the Catholic Church played a huge part in helping to starve all these people, because they told the Catholics to breed and breed and breed, so they would outbreed the Protestants, who were the controlling force in Ireland at that time. So they fanned the flames of sectarianism, just as the penal laws had fanned the flames of sectarianism by Protestants against Catholics. It's the same old story, divide and conquer, you know, turning people who are exactly the same against each other by giving them different labels to believe in. But anyway, the potato, during the worst year of the Irish potato famine, the Irish Great Famine, on Gorta Moor, as it's known here in Ireland, Ireland exported vast quantities of food, all kinds of food, and it was brought to the ports by British troops for export. This is not, like, these are historical facts. I'm not a Republican. I'm not anti-British, and this is just what happened. The same ruling classes that did this to the Irish, we'll do it to the British, as their own people, working class people as well. Look, so let's get that straight. This is nothing to do with nationalism. And this is how diet has been used. Now, during the medieval period, I'll go back to get that again, you had this age of chivalry. This is when things that would happen, like people were no longer allowed to hunt venison or catch salmon because of the high protein levels. And right up until like 100 years ago, you could still receive very serious legal fines and prison sentences for poaching a salmon, you know, on some snotty lord's estate. That's because they wanted the protein all for themselves. And this is how they could maintain this notion that the poor and the working classes are somehow inferior, and we're glorious, we're the elite. It's only the difference was because they had the food supply, and they could control it. So you had this age of chivalry where you had the knights, you know, some lord or earl, and he's decked out in this incredible armour, and he's on a horse that's like 6 feet tall, rushing into an army of peasants, where the average guy is probably like barely between 4 and 5 feet. He's malnourished. That morning he's probably had a handful of oats given to him in his hand, a few nettles he could boil up, and whatever he could find in the area. And this guy, this lord who's coming towards him in all his, like, you know, his noble weaponry, he's, you know, not only decked out a killing machine, you know, he was the 12th century version of an Apache gunship, coming towards these poor bastards. But not only is he so well equipped with a huge sword and everything, but he's also he's probably had like a side of bacon, you know, a load of chestnuts, a load of beer and so on for breakfast, and he's just ready to go. He's full of muscles, he's full of strength, his mind is sharp from the food he's had, the beer has relaxed him a little bit, and he goes in there and he chops up these poor bastards who've been sent out to fight for some other lord who's on their side. Well, he's really on the other side. And then they would, you know, when the battle was over, the elites and the nobles would all get together, and their families would pay ransoms to captured ones, and then they'd have a little party and all go home while the battlefield was strewn with dead and dying, you know, poor people. And that's the way it's always been through history, and diet played a huge part in that. Now, what's very interesting is later on you had a situation came about where you had the development of the crossbow. The crossbow allowed the average person, the average soldier, to, with a single bolt, to take a knight off his horse. Suddenly, the knights who are all, to them, going into a battle with a big sword, hacking people down, that was noble, that was chivalry. Suddenly, some nobody could jump up with a crossbow, bam, and take him out. That was a disgraceful thing. The rules of war have been violated. There's no nobility in it. See, it was only nobility when the elites had all the advantage. As soon as some guy pops up, that's where terrorism comes from. You know, that's what terrorism is. When somebody who's deemed from the lower levels comes up and somehow finds a way to play on a similar level playing field, they're suddenly declared terrorists. And this is why history is crap in school. I hated learning history in school. I just found it incredibly boring. But because they don't teach you the real things, they teach you all the facts and the dates, but they don't tell you about how the people actually lived and what their diets were, and what their problems were like. Did they have? I'm fascinated by history is presented in almost like a Hollywood, even in like up to a university level. You're not really taught in depth. Like, did they have things like pedophilia in the Middle Ages? Well, they did, but like, was it considered a social problem? Did they have drug abuse in the Dark Ages? Did was was things like burglary a problem in Carthage? I find this kind of aspect of history much more interesting because it's the history of how the society really was, as opposed to how the elites wanted to be remembered. So, if you think history is a boring subject, it's only boring because it's been written and documented in a certain way to justify the present existence that we have now. But when you start to look at history as it was for ordinary people, and there's not a lot to find. You really have to dig for this stuff. But the internet's brilliant for that, because there's a lot of archival documents now that from national records and libraries are now available on the internet. That's just a fantastic research. So learn, study. The old saying, those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. I know I'm wandering here, and I started off talking about the role of diet in history, but it's all relevant today because the same elite social structure who dressed up as knights in shining armour and dashing chivalrous ways and hacked to death innocent poor people who are just trying to survive. Those people are still in power, but they do it through things like the IMF and the World Bank and GATT and all these other things. And we have to always watch what's being told to us and never assume that these are benevolent mandates that are being handed down to the people for our benefit, or the benefit of nature, or the benefit of anyone other than them, because the psychopathic control grid still exists, and we should never forget that. And that comes right down to the food we eat. So always practice proper nutrition the best you can. I don't do it all the time. I mean, at Christmas I went mental, but I was having fun. That's okay. But even if you overeat, try to overeat the things that won't kill you or won't mess your head up. Okay, and until the next time we talk, I see you all the best, and may your God, goddess, or whatever, or nothing go with you, and take care of yourself and be safe. And we'll all have a great 2011, I promise.